She was 20, a virgin by choice, not shame. When her father fell into impossible debt, she did the unthinkable. She offered herself to the man who could erase it all. But not for money, not for fame, just to protect the people she loved. What she didn't expect was to find a heart more broken than her own. This is the story of a girl who gave everything, except her soul. Dominic Kane had everything: money, power, control. But behind the glass walls of his empire, he lived with a secret. No woman had ever touched his heart or his body. Years ago, the love of his life was taken by hate. Since then, he buried himself in silence until she arrived. Young, bold, unafraid. And suddenly, his world began to break open. This is the story of a man who finally chose love over fear. Scarlett Evans stood barefoot on the back porch of her family's small home in Austin, Texas. The sunset spilled gold across the cracked concrete, and the dry summer wind tangled through her chestnut hair. She clutched a mug of chamomile tea that had gone cold in her hands. She had just turned 20, yet her soul had always felt older. Wiser, quieter. Scarlett wasn't like other girls her age. She wasn't loud at parties, never chased popularity, and wasn't interested in sharing her body just to feel wanted. She was a virgin, not because anyone told her to be, but because she believed her heart and her body were not prizes to be handed out to passing interest. Her friends called her the one who waits, not out of judgment, but quiet admiration. She waited for something real, a love that would touch her soul, not just her skin. Inside the house, tension built like a thundercloud. Her father, Ray Evans, a construction contractor who'd spent 3 decades building homes for other people, was crumbling in his own. A steel support beam his crew installed had failed at a luxury apartment complex in New York, one owned by none other than Dominic Kane, the feared real estate billionaire with the heart of ice. The damage? Catastrophic. The lawsuit? Ruthless. The amount? $1.2 million. It was a Humber that might as well have been $100 million to a man like Ray. Scarlett heard her mother's worried voice behind closed doors. "Ray, we could lose the house, the business, everything." Her father's voice cracked. "I never meant for this to happen. I don't know how we're going to survive this." The next day, a black car pulled up in front of their modest home. The air turned cold the moment the door opened. Out stepped a man in a tailored charcoal suit with eyes sharp as a hawk's and a jaw carved from stone. Dominic Kane. He didn't smile, didn't shake hands. He spoke like a man used to being obeyed. He offered a deal. "I don't want your company. I don't want your money. You can't give me what you don't have, but you do have something else." Scarlett stood behind the cracked kitchen door, listening. "Your daughter. Scarlett, right?" Ray's face turned ghost white. "What the hell are you saying?" Dominic's voice was quiet but commanding. "One year, she comes to New York. She lives in my penthouse. No physical force, no expectations, no touch, unless she agrees. Her presence only. In return, your debt disappears." There was silence so loud it hurt. Scarlett's heart pounded. Her stomach churned with disbelief. And yet, something strange stirred in her. Not fear, not shame, but clarity. She stepped into the kitchen doorway. "I'll go," her mother gasped. "Scarlett, no! He's a stranger. You don't owe us this." Her father's eyes were glassy, jaw trembling. "Scarlett, don't. Please don't." She looked at Dominic with steady eyes. No tears, no pleading. "I heard your offer. I'll go, but on my terms." He raised a brow. "And what are those?" "My body is mine. Always. You don't get to touch me. You don't get to own me. You get my presence. My silence, if I choose. Nothing more." Dominic looked at her for a long, unreadable moment. Then, to her surprise, he nodded. "Done." That night, Scarlett lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above her. She heard her mother crying down the hall. Her father hadn't come out of his room since the deal. Scarlett wasn't afraid. Not because she trusted Dominic. She didn't. But because she trusted herself. She wasn't a thing to be traded. She wasn't going to New York as property. She was going because she loved too deeply to watch her parents drown in ruin, even if it meant locking herself in a stranger's glass tower for 365 days. 3 days later, a jet waited for her on a private airstrip. Her suitcase was small. Her steps were slow but steady. As she boarded, Dominic stood near the window of the jet, arms folded. He didn't smile, didn't speak, but for a split second, their eyes met, and Scarlett saw something flash in him. Not desire, not power, something lonelier than silence. And so the contract began, not with ink and signatures, but with sacrifice and steel hearts. One virgin girl full of stubborn fire, one broken billionaire hiding behind glass and guilt, and 1 year that neither of them could ever forget. Manhattan looked like a glittering machine from above, cold, mechanical, pulsing with wealth and power. At the top of one of its tallest towers stood Dominic Kane, king of the skyline, lord of concrete and glass. His penthouse apartment, encased in floor-to-ceiling windows, was more museum than home. Art pieces that no longer moved him, books he never read. Silence, so loud it made the marble floors echo his every step. The world saw him as untouchable, ruthless, the kind of man who crushed rivals, ended careers and bought anything or anyone he wanted. But the truth? Dominic Kane was a prisoner, not of money, not of his empire, but of the past. He hadn't touched a woman in almost 20 years. In fact, he had never touched one at all. Yes, Dominic Kane was a virgin, but not from piety or moral code. No, his abstinence was born from heartbreak, from guilt, from a love he was too weak to fight for when it mattered most. Her name was Amara. She was bold, brilliant, and breathtaking. A painter whose work bled color into every canvas and life into every room. She was also black. And in the world Dominic came from, the elite, white, legacy money crowd, loving her had been a sin, a threat to his family name, to his billion-dollar business. When the pressure mounted, Dominic didn't defend her. He let her go, quietly, like a coward. A year later, she and their child died in a hate-fueled arson fire, just days before he planned to reach out again. Since then, Dominic had lived as a ghost inside his own palace. He buried himself in work, closed every door to intimacy, and refused to feel anything. She stepped into his penthouse wearing a plain dress, no makeup, hair in a soft braid. No seduction, no fear, just clear eyes and the posture of someone who bowed to no one. He watched her as she explored the space. She touched nothing, asked for nothing. Not the chandelier imported from France, not the view that cost more than her parents' entire neighborhood. She just stood by the window, arms crossed, back straight. Nice place. Cold, though, she said casually. Looks like a billionaire's museum. He raised a brow. It's not meant to impress. Good, because it doesn't. She walked past him, her boots tapping the marble. Something in him flickered. The days that followed unsettled him in ways he hadn't expected. Scarlett didn't try to seduce him. She didn't giggle at his jokes, didn't ask about his wealth, didn't even care that his face was on Forbes covers. She made her own coffee, ate quietly, didn't ask permission. She didn't flirt, she existed, and that made her more powerful than any woman who had ever tried to get close. Dominic watched her read by the fire at night. Sometimes she cried at books and wiped the tears away with her sleeve. She danced once, barefoot in the kitchen while frying eggs. She had chipped nail polish and a tiny scar near her jaw that she never explained. She was real, and that terrified him. Because every moment she lived so freely in his glass kingdom, she reminded him of the life he never had the courage to fight for. Late one night, Dominic sat alone in his private gallery, a locked room where no staff were allowed. The walls were covered in Amara's paintings, bold strokes, vibrant chaos, sunlight and storms in every piece. He stared at a canvas of her laughing, holding a baby girl with curls and dimples. I wasn't enough, he whispered. I didn't deserve either of you. Behind him, the door creaked. Scarlett had entered silently, barefoot, holding a glass of water. She saw the painting and didn't ask questions. Instead, she stood beside him, not touching, not intruding. After a long silence, she said softly, "You loved her, and you still love her." He nodded once. No words. Just grief. "You never moved on," she added. "Not really." "There was nowhere to go," he said, voice low. "I shut it all down." She met his eyes then, really looked at him. "Then maybe it's time you turn the lights back on." She left the room, didn't wait for applause, didn't expect thanks. Dominic sat in silence for a long time, but something inside him, something long buried, stirred. He didn't know what Scarlett was doing to him. She wasn't trying to fix him. She wasn't trying to heal him. She just saw him. Not Dominic Kane, the billionaire, not the recluse, not the sinner, just a man, broken, bruised, still breathing. And for the first time in years, Dominic wondered, could someone like her ever forgive someone like him? Or better yet, could he ever forgive himself? Scarlett had always been a curious soul, not nosy, just deeply aware. To her, every space told a story, every hallway whispered secrets. And in Dominic Kane's penthouse, silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt haunted. The place was beautiful, but too clean, too polished, like no one actually lived there. The first room she explored was the study, massive, lined with untouched books. She ran her fingers along the leather-bound spines and found a layer of dust. He doesn't read these, she thought. One title caught her attention, The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur. Scarlett smiled faintly. She had that same book, dog-eared, coffee-stained, and full of underlines. She opened it. To her shock, it wasn't a new copy. There were notes in the margins, messy, rushed, in red pen. Words like, "Reminds me of her. She used to say this. I should have fought harder." She sat down slowly, heart thudding. Someone had loved with their whole chest here, and lost. Later, while wandering the west hallway, she noticed a door cracked open. Unlike the others, it wasn't sleek or modern. It had fingerprints on the brass knob. Something about it pulled her in. She stepped inside. The room was smaller, warmer, dusty, but full of life frozen in time. On the wall was a large painting, vivid and powerful. A black woman laughing, holding a toddler with curly hair. Scarlett felt her breath catch. She stepped closer. The name was signed in the bottom corner. Amara. Beside the painting was a fireplace with cold ashes. As Scarlett knelt near it, she noticed burned scraps of paper buried in the gray. Old letters, charred edges, one still partially intact. She gently lifted it. "I miss you more than I should. I know you're afraid of what the world thinks, but I never asked you to protect me. I asked you to love me. And maybe one day our child too." Scarlett read it twice, 3 times. Her eyes blurred with tears. That night, unable to sleep, she wandered into the music room. It was dark except for the moonlight through the glass ceiling. In the corner sat a piano, untouched. It had a tiny chipped ivory key, the kind children press too hard. Scarlett sat before it, lifted the lid, and tapped one soft note. It echoed like a memory. She didn't know how to play, but she let her fingers move anyway. It sounded like a lullaby, or maybe just sorrow. Behind her, she didn't hear the footsteps. "You found the letters." Dominic's voice was barely above a whisper. She froze, but didn't turn. "I didn't mean to invade. You didn't. They're not secrets. Not anymore." She turned now. His face was in shadow, but something in his posture, his quiet surrender, was loud. "She was your first love." He nodded. "My only." Scarlett stood holding the half-burned letter in her trembling hands. "You didn't kill her, but you let the world tell you not to love her." Dominic's jaw clenched. His eyes burned, but he didn't look away. "I thought I was protecting her. From the press, from my family, from the threats." He took a shaky breath. "But I was really protecting myself, my reputation, my cowardice." Scarlett stepped forward. "You think you're a monster?" He didn't reply. "But I think you're a man who lost everything because you forgot what love is meant to do." "And what's that?" he asked, hollow. "Fight, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Dominic looked at her then, really looked. No suit, no mask, just a man undone. Why do you even care? Scarlett swallowed. Her voice was gentle but sure. Because no one deserves to rot in a golden cage with their grief. Not even you. A long pause. Then, you're not afraid of me, are you? No, she whispered. But I think you're still afraid of yourself. He turned and walked to the piano, sat beside her, and for the first time in over 15 years, he played. Not well, but with aching, broken truth. A few notes. Simple. Sad. Scarlett closed her eyes, and somehow, for both of them, the music said more than words ever could. That night, the glass tower no longer felt so silent. A girl who waited and a man who hid had finally opened the same locked door, the one to their hearts. The storm came suddenly like a memory crashing into the present. Rain lashed against the glass windows with a wild rhythm, and thunder echoed through the penthouse like a heartbeat too loud to ignore. The air was heavy, electric, and every corner of the towering home felt more hollow than usual. Scarlett jolted awake. She had dreamed of fire, of smoke choking the air, and of a little girl's laugh vanishing into silence. But it wasn't her nightmare, it felt like his. Without thinking, she got up. No slippers, no robe, just her breath and the pounding of her heart. The hallway was dim, but she knew the way. She paused at his door, hand hovering over the knob. Would he send her away? But before she could knock, the door opened from the inside. Dominic stood there, barefoot, shirt slightly wrinkled, eyes dark but alert. He didn't seem surprised, as if he had been waiting for her. He didn't ask. She didn't explain. She stepped inside quietly and he shut the door behind her. The room was warm and dimly lit with a single bedside lamp. The storm outside roared like a restless ocean. Scarlett's hands trembled slightly, but her gaze was steady. Dominic walked to the window and stood there, staring out at the lightning. Can't sleep, she asked softly. I haven't in years, he murmured. She took a step closer, then another, and suddenly the space between them didn't feel like a room. It felt like a lifetime of unspoken things. They didn't need to say what the thunder already knew. That pain had lived too long in both of them. That love had been something both had feared, not for what it was, but for how much it could destroy. Scarlett looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. I've never been with anyone, not because I was afraid, but because I never trusted anyone to hold my heart without dropping it. Dominic turned slowly, his jaw tightened, not with tension, but with emotion. Neither have I, she blinked. What? I've never been with anyone. Not in that way. Not with truth. Not with love. Not even once. Something shifted, not in the air, but in them. The storm faded into the background. The silence between them swelled, not with tension, but with understanding. No lust, no game. Just two people who had spent too many years trying not to feel. He reached out, not to grab, but to ask. His fingers brushed her wrist like a question. She answered by stepping forward, gently placing her palm on his chest. His heart was racing. So was hers. They didn't rush. They didn't kiss like in the movies. They looked at each other first, long and real, as if trying to memorize the face of someone who saw them clearly for the first time. Clothing fell slowly, carefully, each layer not just fabric, but fear, doubt, shame, all quietly laid to rest. They stood before each other, vulnerable, not just in body, but in soul. No masks, no armor, just skin and trust. Scarlett's fingers trembled slightly as she traced the scar on his shoulder. Dominic lifted her chin and looked her in the eyes, his voice barely a breath. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, she whispered. They lay down side by side, not as lovers trying to claim, but as people learning how to give. Their first time was not perfect. There was hesitation, there were pauses, moments where nerves danced louder than touch. But through every heartbeat, there was safety, and that was more precious than any kind of passion. He kissed her forehead before he kissed her lips. She held his hand tighter than anything else. At one point, tears rolled down her cheeks, not from pain, but from release. The release of fear, of walls, of waiting so long to feel seen. Dominic kissed the tears away, slowly, gently, reverently. It was not just the night they gave their bodies. It was the night they offered their wounds and chose to trust again. When it was over, they didn't speak. They held each other in the hush of the storm, heart to heart, breath to breath. The thunder faded, and for the first time in years, they both fell asleep, together at peace. They hadn't just shared a bed. They had shared their first honest beginning. The morning light poured gently through the penthouse windows, but peace didn't come with it. Scarlett awoke to silence, not the comforting kind, but the kind that screamed that something was wrong. She padded barefoot down the hallway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She found Dominic in the kitchen, standing frozen, phone in hand. His face was pale, eyes hollow, lips pressed tight. Scarlett's stomach turned. What happened? He turned the screen toward her, and her world cracked. Headline: Virgin sold to billionaire. Mystery contract exposes secret deal between construction heiress and Dominic Kane. Another: From innocence to indignity, the woman who sold herself for her family's freedom. And another: Is this love or something darker? Scarlett stared at the screen, heart racing. Photos were everywhere. Her walking beside Dominic, her entering the building, even blurred screenshots from their first dinner together. Some tabloid had pieced together the unthinkable and made it worse. She dropped the phone, breath catching in her throat. How? Dominic's jaw tensed. I don't know. Only a few people even knew about the contract. And yet the entire world does now. Scarlett's voice shook, but she stood tall. The backlash came faster than either of them expected. Within hours, her phone was flooded. Messages, threats, shameful words from strangers. People she hadn't heard from in years now sent cruel emojis or silence. Her inbox was full of things like, wow, didn't know you had a price. Your dad sold you? Virgin auctioned off to Kane. Typical. It wasn't just ridicule, it was violation. Her father called crying. Her mother couldn't speak. Her little brother had to be pulled out of school. Scarlett watched the ripples hit everyone she loved, waves from a bomb she didn't even throw. Dominic tried to fix it. He released a statement denying coercion. He threatened legal action. He offered to fly her away from the press. But nothing could stop the bleeding. Not out there, and not in Scarlett's heart. He found her in the closet, folding a sweater she had borrowed from his drawer weeks ago. Scarlett! His voice broke. She didn't look up. I trusted you, she said calmly. Too calmly. I didn't leak it. I swear. Maybe you didn't, but you didn't protect it either. She turned now, eyes full, not with rage but pain. You promised I'd be safe. You were here. No, she said. I was hidden, not protected. You locked me away like a secret, and now that secret has been weaponized against me. Dominic stepped forward, helpless. I'll make this right. You can't, her voice cracked. Because what's broken isn't just my image. It's my heart. She wiped a tear. I gave you everything, Dominic. Not just my body. I gave you my silence, my loyalty, my truth. And now the world thinks I was just bought. You weren't. But you didn't stop them from thinking I was. And maybe part of you believed it too. Dominic looked shattered. I love you, he whispered. She looked away. Then why do I feel so alone? She didn't slam the door when she left. She didn't need to. Her absence was louder than any goodbye. Outside, cameras flashed like lightning. But she walked forward, chin up, tears silently falling. Because Scarlett Evans wasn't ashamed of her choices. She was only ashamed of the world that refused to see them for what they truly were. Brave. Back inside, Dominic sat alone in the kitchen where it began. The headline still glowed on his phone. But one line stayed etched in his mind. Her final words. I gave you my trust, not just my body. You didn't protect either. And for the first time in years, the cold-hearted billionaire cried. For days, Dominic Kane didn't leave the penthouse. The press called it damage control. His lawyers called it containment. His PR team offered sanitized statements, polished scripts, clean lies. But Dominic sat in silence. In the room where she used to laugh, where she once said, "You didn't kill her, but you let the world tell you not to love her." Scarlett's words played in his mind over and over. So did Amara's voice, the one he hadn't heard in over a decade. She had believed in change, even when the world didn't. And now he had failed both women. But this time, he didn't run. He stood up, and he chose truth. He requested an interview, not through press releases or PR channels. He called the largest national news network and insisted it be live. No filters, no edits, no safe words. The host was skeptical. The media was bloodthirsty. But Dominic Kane sat down calm and steady and told everything. The world watched in stunned silence as the billionaire everyone feared said words no one expected. "I offered a contract, out of arrogance, out of selfishness, but not out of cruelty. And yet, I became a symbol of everything wrong with power." Scarlett Evans didn't sell herself. I didn't buy her. She saved her family. And in doing that, she saved me from myself. He didn't stop there. He told them about Amara. "I was in love with a woman named Amara Jones. She was black. She was beautiful. And I let the world's racism tell me I couldn't fight for her. When she was attacked, I didn't stand up, and I lost her forever." His voice cracked. "I spent the next decade hiding behind glass towers and closed doors. But Scarlett wouldn't let me stay silent. She taught me that loving someone isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing a man can do." The host asked why he was sharing this now. Dominic looked straight into the camera and said, "Because the world mocks girls like Scarlett. It silences women like Amara, and I won't be part of that silence anymore." The next week, Dominic made a series of public moves. He donated $50 million to civil rights foundations across the country, focused on racial justice, gender equality, and survivor support. He opened 5 women's shelters in cities plagued by hate crimes and domestic violence, and he named the fund the Scarlett and Amara Trust for Love Without Fear. The media began to shift, not overnight, not completely, but people listened. For once, the narrative didn't end with shame. It continued with change. Months passed. Scarlett had moved to New Haven, Connecticut, far from tabloids and flashing lights. She taught creative writing at a women's college. Young girls with big dreams and bigger hearts. She spoke softly but powerfully, always reminding them, "You are not your past. You are your choice, and you never owe your truth to anyone who doesn't earn it." The girls adored her, but even they saw the quiet ache she tried to hide. Love didn't disappear. It just paused. Then, one late spring morning, the school held an open lecture series. The topic was Stories That Changed the World. Scarlett stood at the podium, reading a poem her student had written about bravery, and when she finished, the audience clapped. All but one man who stood instead of applauding. Her heart stopped. Dominic Kane stood at the back of the auditorium. No cameras, no suit, just a single red rose in his hand. He walked slowly down the aisle, never breaking eye contact. Gasps filled the room. Whispers followed him, but he didn't care. When he reached the front, he got on one knee. Not with a ring, not with a promise of forever, but with an apology, one rooted in humility. "Scarlett Evans," he began, voice steady. "You were my first everything, first truth, first love, first real mirror. I broke that, not out of malice, but out of fear. Today, I'm not asking you to come back to me. I'm asking if I can walk beside you, as an equal, as a man who's trying, not perfect. No contracts, no glass cages, no shame, just us. If you still want me." Scarlett blinked, stunned. The world melted away. For a second, it was just her and him, 2 people who had been stripped bare by the world and somehow found their way back. A tear rolled down her cheek. She walked toward him, took his hand, and pulled him gently to his feet. Then, smiling through tears, she whispered, "Let's write our story together." They kissed, not in secret, not in fear, but in the open, before the world. And this time, no one dared to mock, because this wasn't a scandal. It was a redemption, a beginning. They were not bought, not broken, not buried. They were brave, equal, free, loved.